In a bustling Chicago diner, under flickering neon lights, a quiet storm was brewing. Most customers noticed only the swirl of coffee in their cups or the sizzle of eggs on the griddle, but something far more electric crackled in the air. Sarah Donovan, a dedicated waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile, had reached the brink of her patience. When a self-assured millionaire strutted in barking orders and hurling insults at staff and patrons alike, he triggered a chain reaction no one could have anticipated. In mere minutes, words were exchanged, pride clashed with humility, and a single moment changed Sarah's life forever. Sarah Donovan awoke every morning in the cramped studio apartment she shared with her younger sister Lucy. At 25, Sarah should have felt like her future was wide open, but life had always made her feel a few steps behind. Their parents had passed away in a car accident when Sarah was in high school, leaving her with the responsibility of caring for Lucy. If not for the kindness of their aunt, they would have ended up on the streets. But tragedy, as it happens, has a way of forging unbreakable bonds, and also of building walls around dreams. For Sarah, taking care of Lucy was everything, leaving little time to nurture her own ambitions. She sometimes thought about going back to college, maybe pursuing culinary school, but it always felt out of reach. The money wasn't there. The time wasn't there. So she worked at the Maplewood Diner, an unassuming red vinyl booth kind of place that had been around for decades. Her shift began at dawn, and by 6 in the morning, she was greeting bleary-eyed locals travelers and the occasional out-of-town visitor who stumbled in. She liked the hustle of waitressing, the interplay of conversation, the dance of coffee refills, and the hum of the grill. There was beauty in that routine if one looked hard enough. But that sense of acceptance came with its share of hardships. Customers could be demanding, managers could be strict, and the wages were barely enough to support Lucy and herself. Still, Sarah had a reputation for being polite, efficient, and ready to brighten a patron's day with a quick, genuine smile. It was a Monday morning in mid-October when everything changed. A crisp wind howled through the streets of Chicago, bringing a chill that seeped into the diner every time someone opened the door. Sarah had just cleared table 4, where an elderly couple finished their eggs and was heading to greet a new arrival. That's when James Caldwell swaggered in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored navy suit that likely cost more than Sarah's annual rent. He wasn't a regular, and his cologne was so strong it announced him before his face did. It was the face of money, a carefully groomed beard hair, slicked back with dark eyes, scanning the room as though he owned it. Sarah had seen folks like him before, business moguls, who occasionally stopped by for coffee meetings or a quick bite in between deals. But something about James felt larger than life, more imposing. The hush that swept over the diner was a testament to his presence. Sarah approached him with her usual warmth. "Good morning, sir," she said, leading him to a booth that had just been wiped down. "Would you like to start with coffee?" James slid into the booth and glanced around with mild disdain. "I suppose," he replied curtly. There was no please, no eye contact, just a sense of entitlement that made Sarah's spine stiffen. She grabbed a menu and set it in front of him. At the next table, a pair of truck drivers recognized James from a business magazine cover. One whispered to the other, "That's James Caldwell. He's invested in everything. I heard he's on the cusp of a new IPO." The name rang a faint bell for Sarah, too. She recalled Lucy once mentioning an investor named Caldwell, who was rumored to have links to several major developments in the city. Maybe it was the same person, maybe not. But given his attitude, She suspected it was indeed the James Caldwell, a self-made millionaire, rumored to move mountains with a single phone call. She poured him coffee, attempting small talk. "It's a bit chilly out there today, huh? Feels like winter's knocking on our doors early." He didn't even look at her. "If I want conversation, I'll ask for it," he muttered. Sarah's cheeks burned red, but she held her composure. She was no stranger to difficult customers. Taking a quick breath, she forced a polite smile and walked back to the counter to give him space. Every time she came to check on him, his annoyance only seemed to mount. He'd ask for eggs and then claim they were undercooked or overcooked. He'd demand a new pot of coffee because the one she brought tasted stale. He insulted the diner's decor and even said the booth's vinyl seats were a cheap imitation of comfort. By the time he finished his meal, he had made 3 separate demands for replacements, something Sarah tried to accommodate with the best of her ability. Michael, the diner's manager, watched nervously from behind the counter. He was used to seeing Sarah handle the toughest clientele with a smile, but even he could tell she was nearing her limit. When Sarah brought over the check, James Caldwell picked it up and scoffed as if offended by the numbers. "This place should pay me for the inconvenience," he said loudly enough for all the nearby patrons to hear. "I've had better service in a truck stop in rural Nebraska." Sarah remained civil. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I tried my best to meet your requests. If there's anything else you need, I'm happy to help." He fixed his gaze on her eyes, cold and calculating. "Your best, that was your best. Let me give you some advice if you can't handle perfection. Maybe you should find another line of work. A girl like you is lucky I even stepped foot in this run-down little joint." A hush fell over the diner. Sarah felt a wave of humiliation mix with anger. She'd had rude customers before, but few had been so openly demeaning. Across the room, Lucy, who had stopped by before her class, watched with wide, worried eyes. She knew her sister's tolerance was stretched thin by endless double shifts and financial stress. Something inside Sarah snapped. Her heart thumped against her ribcage, and the breath caught in her throat. She'd always tried to keep a calm front, to shield Lucy from any negativity, to grin and bear it, because tips were how they survived. But James Caldwell's tone, his words telling her she was lucky, he came here belittling her entire existence, was more than she could take. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell," she began, voice shaking slightly. "We treat every customer with respect, and maybe this run-down little joint isn't what you're used to, but we're proud of it. We work hard. I work hard. And if my best isn't good enough for you, maybe you should consider taking your breakfast somewhere else." The diner went dead silent. In a corner booth, a businessman pretending to check his phone suddenly locked eyes with the scene. The 2 truck drivers were all but gaping at Sarah's boldness. Lucy's heart hammered as she stood rooted, uncertain if she should intervene. Even Michael, the manager, was too stunned to move. James Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. No one, it seemed, had dared speak to him this way. The shock quickly morphed into anger. His face hardened, and he tossed a $50 bill on the table as if it were a piece of trash. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said, voice dripping with malice. "Enjoy your tip. You'll never amount to anything in your pathetic life." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door to slam shut behind him with a jarring clang. Sarah stood there, every nerve in her body vibrating. She glanced at the $50 on the table, a fortune in tip money for a single meal, but it felt cursed, tainted by his cruelty. For a moment, she considered hurling it after him. Then she felt Lucy's gentle hand on her shoulder, and saw the alarm in her sister's eyes. Michael hurried over. "Sarah, are you all right?" She nodded, blinking back tears. "Yeah, I'm fine," she lied. "Go take a break," he said more kindly than usual. "I'll cover your section." Sarah retreated to the diner's break room. Leaning against the dingy wall, she tried to steady her breathing. Her mind whirled. She worried about losing her job for telling off a customer. She worried about Lucy's college tuition, the rent, the groceries. But strangely, she also felt a spark of defiance, a sense of relief that she'd finally stood up for herself, if only for a second. Over the next hour, the diner slowly returned to its usual clatter and buzz. Locals whispered about Sarah's confrontation, some praising her courage, others concerned that James Caldwell could cause trouble. While many admired her backbone, everyone knew Caldwell was well connected. Who knew what strings he might pull for retribution? But the morning ended without further incident, and by late afternoon, Sarah pushed the confrontation to a back corner of her mind. She went home, cooked dinner for Lucy, and tried not to think about the potential fallout from telling off a self-important millionaire. She assumed she'd never see him again. The following day began like any other. Morning light filtered through her threadbare curtains, stirring her awake. She performed her usual routine, brewed a pot of coffee for Lucy, packed her sister's lunch for school, then caught the bus to the diner. She arrived a little before 6, stepping into the warm glow of the neon open sign. Michael was already there, flipping through the mail with a frown. A few stray bills, an advertisement or two, and a small stack of envelopes waited on the counter. He glanced at Sarah, then at the stack. "Strangest thing," he said. "We got a fancy envelope addressed to you." Sarah's stomach tightened. To me, Michael shrugged, handing it over. It was a matte black envelope, embossed with gold script. No return address. Even the weight of it felt luxurious in her hand. She glanced around nervously, as if half expecting James Caldwell to jump out from behind the pie display. Carefully, she slid a finger beneath the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of heavy card stock. At first glance, it looked like a bank's invitation to an exclusive event. But as she read the name, her heart flipped. James Caldwell requests the presence of Ms. Sarah Donovan at a private meeting. Along with it was a black metal card bearing her name, Sarah Donovan. It had a subtle platinum chip in it and a logo she didn't recognize. No details, no instructions, just the vague invitation and the card. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" Sarah could only shake her head in disbelief. "We had a run-in yesterday. That's all." Even more curious, an index-sized card fell out of the envelope. It held 4 words, scrawled in elegant cursive. "Buy whatever you need." For a few seconds, Sarah's world tilted. She recalled the rancor in Caldwell's voice the day before. Why would he do this? Was it a trap? A sick joke? She felt uneasy, suspicious. The black card felt as though it vibrated with an otherworldly aura in her hands. "I have no idea what this means," Sarah finally managed. Michael studied the card warily. "You want me to toss it?" Sarah glanced between the card and the invitation. For a moment, she was tempted to toss it in the trash, to sever all ties with the rude millionaire. But curiosity gnawed at her. Also, she couldn't ignore that single line, "Buy whatever you need." Could this card be loaded with credit? Could it help Lucy get through school? Help them pay off debts? No. It was too surreal. And yet, "Let me hang on to it for now," she said, slipping it back into the envelope. She put it in the pocket of her apron, trying to steady her trembling hands. The day dragged on, each minute weighed down by her preoccupation. Between serving pancakes and refilling coffee, her mind spun with questions. What did James Caldwell want revenge? Perhaps he was trying to lure her into some scheme. She felt a flicker of fear. With that kind of wealth and influence, he could easily manipulate her life. And then there was Lucy. If he was out for revenge, Sarah worried about her sister's safety. She decided to text Lucy, telling her to stay close to friends and keep her phone on. Lucy's reply was the immediate concern of an anxious sibling. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Sarah brushed it off, telling Lucy not to worry. But still the knot in her stomach tightened. At around 3 in the afternoon, the diner's door chimed. Sarah looked up from wiping the counter to see a man in a charcoal grey suit step in. He had sharp features, slicked hair, and carried himself with an air of authority. He glanced around, spotted Sarah, and approached with practiced calm. "You're Sarah Donovan?" he asked, voice low and serious. She nodded. He produced a sleek business card from inside his jacket. "My name's Nicholas Grant. I work for James Caldwell. He'd like to arrange a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." Sarah caught Michael's alarmed gaze from across the diner. I don't understand," she stammered. Why Nicholas's expression softened slightly. "He wants to see you." "It's about an offer." The word offer reverberated in her mind. She couldn't help but think of the black card in her pocket, the cryptic invitation. The swirl of confusion threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know," she said, swallowing hard. "I'm working." Nicholas nodded, as though he'd anticipated her reluctance. "Of course. But Mr. Caldwell strongly encourages you to accept his invitation. He suggested that you might find it beneficial." Sarah thought of Lucy of the rent due at the end of the month. She felt torn between caution and a flicker of desperate hope. "Tell him I'll think about it," she said, finally. Nicholas handed her his business card. "He doesn't wait long," he stated politely but firmly, before turning and leaving as quietly as he'd come. For the rest of her shift, Sarah was a knot of nerves. After she clocked out, she slung her jacket over her shoulders and hurried through the chilly streets to catch her bus home. As she walked, the city's bustle honking cabs, rumbling trains, street vendors, shouting about hot dogs, barely registered in her mind. She clutched the black card in her pocket, as though it were a live wire, petrified and strangely compelled by what it could mean. Back in her apartment, Lucy was standing over the stove, trying her hand at stir-fry. The smell of ginger and sesame oil filled the narrow kitchen. "Hey, sis," Lucy greeted. "You okay? You look pale." Sarah forced a smile. "Just a long day at work." She set her things down, then pulled out the envelope and black card to show Lucy. Lucy's eyes widened. "What is that?" Sarah tried her best to explain the incident with James Caldwell and the sudden appearance of his messenger. Lucy's jaw dropped in disbelief. "You told off James Caldwell." "The tech and finance tycoon. I read about him in the Chicago Business Journal. He's on some Forbes list for the fastest-growing private investments." "Yeah, apparently," Sarah murmured, turning the card over and over in her hand. "He was awful. Then out of nowhere, he sends me this invitation and a credit card that presumably has no limit." Lucy stared at the black card, her eyes alight with both fear and amazement. What does he want in return? That's what I'm afraid to find out. Sarah sighed. Nicholas said Caldwell has an offer. But for what? Lucy fell silent. She knew exactly how precarious their situation was. They lived paycheck to paycheck. The slightest improvement, like help with Lucy's tuition, could be life-changing. But at what cost? That night, Sarah tossed and turned in bed, haunted by dreams of Caldwell's sneer. In one nightmare, she was trapped at the diner, while Caldwell sat in the booth, pointing to a contract she was forced to sign in blood. She woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. Morning came too soon, and the question still burned. Should she meet him? Caution warred with curiosity. In the end, she reasoned that understanding what he wanted was better than living in fear of the unknown. So on her break, she called Nicholas's number. He answered on the first ring. "I'll do the meeting," she told him, hearing her own voice shake. "But only if it's in a public place. Mr. Caldwell anticipated your concern." Nicholas replied, "You can meet at the Drake Hotel Lounge tomorrow at 2 p.m. The Drake Hotel was one of Chicago's most iconic luxury hotels, famed for its rich history and elegant atmosphere. It was definitely public. Sarah exhaled, relieved. "Fine. I'll be there," she said, ending the call with a trembling hand. At precisely 4:45 p.m. The next day, Sarah walked through the gilded doors of the Drake, her sensible flats clicking on the polished marble floor. The lobby was a kaleidoscope of plush furniture, ornate chandeliers, and wealthy patrons sipping afternoon tea. She felt wildly out of place in her second-hand black dress and scuffed coat. Yet she summoned her nerve and asked the concierge for directions to the lounge. She found James Caldwell seated at a small table near the window, overlooking Lake Michigan. He wore another immaculate suit, charcoal with a pale silver tie, and sipped a glass of sparkling water. Nicholas stood off to the side, arms crossed, watchful. Caldwell rose as Sarah approached, though his face remained inscrutable. "Ms. Donovan," he greeted, motioning for her to sit. Sarah settled into the chair across from him, her spine rigid with tension. "I'm here," she said, voice tight. "What is this about?" Caldwell studied her with an unreadable expression. "Coffee." She shook her head. "No, thank you." A faint smirk ghosted his lips. "I've had time to reflect on our interaction," he began. "And I realized I may have been too harsh. You caught me on a bad day, and I let my frustration spill onto you. I'm a businessman, Ms. Donovan. I've learned it's wise to fix mistakes when possible." Sarah frowned, suspicious. "You call sending me a black card fixing a mistake?" Caldwell inclined his head slightly. "In a sense, yes. That card grants you a line of credit tied to one of my personal accounts. It has no preset spending limit, and I intend for you to use it." She clenched her hands in her lap. "Why would I do that?" He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Because I see potential in you. That much is evident in how you handled me at the diner." His eyes flicked downward, perhaps recalling the humiliation. "I like people who aren't afraid to speak their mind, even if it means confronting someone as powerful as me." Sarah's heart thumped. "That's not a reason to hand me an unlimited credit card." He paused, measuring his words. "I have a new project, a chain of high-end farm-to-table restaurants in major cities. I'm seeking an operations consultant, someone who understands the nitty-gritty of what happens on the ground." You, Ms. Donovan, have that experience. You know how a diner works. You know the value of genuine service. I want you to be part of the pilot program." She stared at him, stunned. "But I have no formal training in restaurant management." He shrugged. "Formal training can be bought. True insight can't. That's where you come in. I'm offering to fund your education should you choose to pursue culinary or hospitality management, and I'll pay you a salary to help me develop these restaurants from the ground up. Consider the black card a gesture of good faith and an advance on your future." For a long moment, Sarah struggled to find words. It was an absurd proposition, coming from a man who just days before had humiliated her in front of a diner full of people. "And what if I say no?" His lips twitched in a ghost of a grin. "Then you're free to leave. The card is still yours, but the limit will be revoked. I'm not forcing you. It's your decision." 1,000 thoughts battled in her mind. Lucy's tuition, their financial struggles, the dream of a better life. But there was also her pride, her intuition telling her to tread carefully. "Why me?" she asked at last. "You could hire any hospitality professional in the city." "True," he admitted, swirling the water in his glass. "But I want someone who's unfiltered, who'll speak truth without fear of losing favor. The way you talked to me, no one else in my circle does that. They're all too busy telling me what I want to hear. I need honesty to build something real." Sarah felt her pulse pounding in her temples. This was too strange, too sudden, and yet there was a sincerity in his tone she hadn't expected. "I need time to think," she whispered. Caldwell nodded. "Of course. Take a week. Use the card if you wish, but I assume you'll be cautious. My only request is that you join me for dinner next Saturday to discuss your decision. We can meet at one of my properties, a new restaurant concept. Nicholas will send you the details." Sarah left the Drake Hotel in a daze. The crisp wind outside was almost a relief, a reminder she was still tethered to reality. A swirl of conflicting emotions raged. Could she trust a man who had insulted her, humiliated her, and then turned around to offer her the opportunity of a lifetime? Was it a trap? Or was this the break she'd always dreamed about? The break that would finally rescue her and Lucy from their endless struggles. That evening, over a cup of chamomile tea, Sarah told Lucy everything. Lucy squealed with excitement. "This could be your chance." Sarah then sobered. "But if he's playing some twisted game, it could be dangerous." Days passed and Sarah continued her shifts at the diner, as if life hadn't been upended by an impossible offer. She found herself studying the black card each night. Sometimes she'd place it back in her wallet. Other times she'd consider throwing it away. The temptation was undeniable. She imagined all the ways it could lift their burdens, pay off Lucy's tuition bills, fix the leaky roof in their apartment building, maybe even move to a better place. On Friday, after an exhausting double shift, she decided to test the card in a small way. She took Lucy to a modest department store, intending to buy her sister a new winter coat. Lucy's old one had rips along the lining and a missing button. At the register, Sarah's hands shook as she slid the black card. The transaction processed without a hitch. That evening, Lucy wore the new coat around their living room, beaming at the warmth and the softness of the faux fur collar. It was a small luxury that momentarily drowned out Sarah's lingering fears. Still, doubt clawed at her. She couldn't forget Caldwell's condescending words. People didn't change overnight, did they? Maybe he was used to playing games with people's lives, dangling opportunities like bait. Perhaps it was all part of some twisted power play. But come Saturday night, she found herself nervously stepping into a sleek new restaurant in downtown Chicago. The sign outside read, Le Jardin Urbain, a swirl of modern neon letters against a dark backdrop. Inside, she was greeted by a glass-enclosed garden of herbs and vegetables, the aroma of rosemary and basil thick in the air. Nicholas stood near the entrance, nodding curtly when he saw her. "Mr. Caldwell is waiting," he said, leading her to a private table near the back. Caldwell was there sipping wine. He rose graciously, gesturing for her to join him. The ambiance was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Soft lighting, sleek furniture, and subtle touches of greenery. The staff glided around the room in crisp uniforms. She felt underdressed in her simple black dress, her hair pinned back in a loose bun. "Welcome," he said, taking a seat. "I'm glad you came." Sarah sat stiffly. "I haven't decided anything yet. But I did buy my sister a coat. So I guess I owe you." "Thanks." He waved a hand dismissively. "It's a small expense hardly worth mentioning." Then he eyed her carefully. "Though I'm pleased you used the card. Shows you're at least considering my offer." She folded her hands on the table. "If we're going to do this, I have questions. Lots of them." He smiled. "Ask away." The next hour was a whirlwind of fine dining and deep conversation. They sampled dishes, charred Brussels, sprouts, seared scallops with lemon beurre blanc, braised short ribs in red wine sauce, exquisitely plated. And all the while, Caldwell spoke about his vision for a restaurant chain that blended farm-to-table freshness with urban sophistication. He explained his business model, the carefully crafted brand partnerships, the marketing strategies aimed at a younger, socially conscious demographic. Sarah listened, her mind abuzz. She was impressed by how thoroughly he'd planned everything. She found herself chiming in, offering critiques from a waitress's standpoint: portion sizes, table turnover, times the importance of treating staff well. He listened intently, even took notes on his phone. She was surprised to see him so receptive, even praising her insights. But there was something else too. A quieter narrative Caldwell wove about his past. He confessed that he hadn't always been wealthy. He'd grown up on the rougher outskirts of Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. He told her about how he'd started investing in small tech ventures after working nights to save money, about the close calls and near failures that almost ended everything before it began. "Somewhere along the way, I lost touch with where I started," he said, voice tinged with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. "I became arrogant." Sarah recalled his biting words at the diner. "So you want this restaurant chain to remind you of your roots?" He nodded slowly. "In a sense, yes. And I think the authenticity you carry is part of that reminder." It was a confession that softened Sarah's guarded stance, if only a little. By the time dessert came, a delicate apple tart with caramel drizzle, she was no longer wholly convinced Caldwell was a monster. He was certainly complex with a rough edge to him. But maybe, just maybe, there was a real person buried under that $1,000,000 polish. Still, Sarah had one more question. "Let's say I accept. What exactly do you expect from me day to day?" He set his fork down, steepling his fingers. "I want you to spend time training in different departments: back of house, front of house, procurement, even HR. I want your fresh perspective. You'll report to me or to Nicholas on what's working and what isn't. Eventually, I'll help you enroll in a culinary or hospitality management program, your choice, and once you finish, you'll have a leadership role in the chain." Her eyes widened. That's a huge commitment. What if I fail? He chuckled, a rare softening of his features. Sarah Donovan. I've bet on far riskier endeavors than you. Then he leaned in, voice quieter. I don't think you'll fail. But if you do, at least you'll have tried. Life's too short to stay stagnant. She felt emotion tighten in her chest. Images of Lucy's future, of her own secret dreams, flashed through her mind. All her life she'd settled for less, partly out of necessity. Was it time to gamble on something bigger? After dinner, he walked her to the exit. Nicholas lingered a few steps behind, respectful but watchful. The night air greeted them crisp and charged with city lights. Caldwell held out a business folder. Inside you'll find the terms of our agreement, an initial contract, your salary, and an outline of the next 6 months. Take it. Read it, consult a lawyer if you wish. Let me know by next week. Sarah took the folder, her heart pounding. All right. He nodded. Good night, Miss Donovan. She watched him slip into a sleek black town car, with Nicholas at the wheel. The weight of the folder in her hands felt monumental. One week later, by the following Thursday, Sarah had practically memorized every line of the contract, every clause. It was surprisingly fair, offering her a salary higher than she could have ever dreamed of at the diner, plus full coverage for educational expenses related to hospitality or culinary programs. There was even a non-disclosure agreement standard in big business. The only real catch was a 2-year employment commitment. If she quit before then, she'd owe Caldwell's firm a portion of her educational costs. She sought advice from a pro bono legal clinic. The lawyer on duty confirmed the contract was legitimate and not predatory. In fact, it was quite generous. If you have this opportunity, I'd take it, the lawyer advised. Just keep your wits about you. Lucy was ecstatic, dancing around the apartment, already planning the changes they'd make to their lives, paying off student loans, moving to a better neighborhood, maybe even taking a vacation for the first time in years. But Sarah still felt a knot of doubt. Despite Caldwell's apparent sincerity, she couldn't shake the memory of his harshness. Was this philanthropic side a fleeting whim? Yet each passing day, the diner felt more stifling. She'd started noticing how run down it was, the peeling wallpaper, the broken jukebox that no one bothered to fix the heartbreak in the eyes of long-time wait staff who'd given up on bigger dreams. Sarah admired their resilience, but she knew she yearned for something else. The memory of Caldwell's words rang in her mind. Life's too short to stay stagnant. So on Friday afternoon, she dialed Caldwell's number. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Donovan, he said smoothly, as if expecting her call. I'll do it, Sarah said, exhaling a rush of anxiety. I'll sign. She heard a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Excellent choice. I'll have Nicholas meet you tomorrow with the final documents. Sarah's heart thrummed, excitement and dread interwoven. All right. That night, she penned her 2 weeks' notice for Michael at the diner. Her hands trembled. She had spent so many years seeing the diner as her safety net, the only consistent job she'd ever known. She worried how Michael would take it. He'd been a steady, if somewhat aloof mentor for her. But there was no turning back now. Michael took the news better than she expected. A flicker of sadness crossed his features. You've got big potential, Sarah, he said, patting her shoulder. I always knew you'd move on to something bigger someday. Just promise you'll visit. She nodded, tears prickling her eyes, grateful he wasn't angry. And so it began. Sarah stepped into Caldwell's world, and it was as if she'd entered an entirely new universe. Fancy boardrooms with sweeping city views replaced the diner's grease-stained counters. Instead of waking at dawn to serve coffee, she found herself in meetings discussing produce supply chains, brand identity, and restaurant layouts. Initially, the lingo overwhelmed her talk of leveraged buyouts, private equity franchising models, but she refused to be intimidated. In the evenings, she devoured books on business and hospitality. On weekends, Lucy tested recipes with her, the two sisters transforming their small kitchen into a test lab of soups, sauces, and pastries. Caldwell insisted she shadow some of his top executives. She spent a month in the finance department, learning how budgets were created, how profits were projected. Another month went by in marketing, where she sat in on creative meetings about branding style guides and social media campaigns. All along, she was the odd one out, lacking formal credentials, but bringing real-world experience to the table. Many in Caldwell's organization eyed her with skepticism. Who was this unknown waitress who'd suddenly landed a high-paying position, courtesy of the boss himself? Some whispered that she must have some hold over Caldwell. Others speculated about nepotism or scandal. Sarah felt the chill of those rumors, but she pressed on, determined to prove herself. Slowly, her sincerity, her eagerness to learn, and her grounded perspective began to win them over. Meanwhile, Caldwell's demeanor remained professional, almost detached. They interacted mostly through scheduled meetings. He would ask for her thoughts on various aspects of the new restaurants or invite her to taste tests at the pilot location. Sometimes, in a rare, candid moment, he'd ask about Lucy, or mention his own teenage years as if trying to find common ground. But mostly, he kept his distance, as if fearful of letting his guard down. A turning point came about 3 months into the arrangement, when Sarah accompanied Caldwell to a gala fundraiser for Chicago's homeless youth programs. She was terrified, having never attended such a formal event. She wore a simple navy dress. Lucy had helped her pick out her hair in soft curls. Caldwell introduced her to key restaurant investors, including a cameo by Mark Cuban, the well-known entrepreneur, who shook Sarah's hand warmly and told Caldwell, "I hear you've got a new rising star in your ranks." Caldwell nodded with the faintest smile. Sarah's cheeks burned red at the praise. Throughout the evening, Sarah observed Caldwell navigating the crowd with practiced elegance. He mingled with celebrities, philanthropic leaders, and political figures, always maintaining a charming facade. But at one point, she caught him standing alone near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. He looked pensive, almost lonely. She approached tentatively. "Quite the event, huh?" she remarked nervously, smoothing the skirt of her dress. He glanced at her, a wistful expression in his eyes. "Yes, a lot of power in this room." Sarah followed his gaze. "And a lot of need outside these walls." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, or if these galas are just a way to make everyone feel good about themselves." Sarah tilted her head. "Well, cynicism aside, they raise a lot of money. I benefited from a program like this once when Lucy and I lost our parents. My aunt struggled to support us, and a local charity helped keep us afloat. It's not all for show. It can change lives." He studied her for a moment, then turned back to the window. "Thanks for reminding me." The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. A subtle camaraderie began to form between them. It was fragile, built on mutual respect, rather than the arrogance and subservience that had marked their first encounter. Over the next few months, Sarah continued to excel. She started official courses at a prestigious hospitality program fully sponsored by Caldwell. While she was often overwhelmed balancing her job responsibilities with night classes, she thrived on the challenge. Lucy took on a part-time job to support her own expenses, determined not to weigh Sarah down. The sisters found themselves in a better financial position than ever before. However, not everyone was pleased with Sarah's rapid ascent. Some executives in Caldwell's circle, veterans of the industry, resented her position. They questioned Caldwell's judgment in hiring an untested outsider. One evening, while reviewing staff training modules, she overheard two senior managers complaining about her in hushed tones. "She's just a waitress," one scoffed. "Caldwell's pet project. She'll ruin everything we've built if he keeps giving her this much authority." "It's humiliating," the other agreed. "I spent years in top restaurants working my way up. She just waltzes in because she had a spat with Caldwell at a diner." Sarah retreated before they could see her heart racing. She swallowed a lump of hurt and anger, forcing herself to stay composed. If she confronted them, it would only confirm their suspicions that she was out of her depth. Instead, she resolved to let her work speak for itself. But the tension escalated. When Sarah was scheduled to give a presentation on improving staff training for the pilot restaurant, her slides mysteriously disappeared from the system. She had to scramble to rebuild them minutes before the meeting. Another time, her proposals for a new table layout went missing, and she suspected sabotage. Yet she refused to let intimidation define her journey. She worked longer hours, triple-backed up her files, and refused to be pushed aside. Caldwell noticed her exhaustion. One afternoon, he called her into his office, an intimidating space on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper with glass walls overlooking the city. "You look drained," he remarked, eyeing the dark circles under her eyes. Sarah forced a small laugh. "Just the pace. Balancing classes work and dealing with some obstacles." He frowned. "What kind of obstacles?" She hesitated, not wanting to come off as a complainer. But Caldwell's gaze was sharp. Eventually, she told him about the sabotaged slides and missing proposals. "It's nothing I can't handle," she concluded. "But I won't lie, it's stressful." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Names?" She shook her head. "I don't have proof. I won't accuse anyone without being sure." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "I'll have it do some digging. In the meantime, if you need help, ask. I don't want you bogged down by office politics." Sarah nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you." As the weeks went on, the pilot restaurant's grand opening loomed. Sarah was heavily involved coordinating with chefs, finalizing menus, training waitstaff, ensuring the decor matched the brand's upscale yet earthy ethos. The unstoppable pace left her breathless but exhilarated. She found joy in the creative process of building something from the ground up, something that fused the diner's sense of warmth with fine dining elegance. Finally, opening night arrived. The restaurant buzzed with VIP guests, food critics, and local influencers. Fairy lights twinkled above the entrance, and a small jazz ensemble played softly in the corner. Caldwell walked the floor, greeting people with polished confidence. Sarah was at his side, smoothing last-minute details, ensuring the bartenders had enough garnish, directing the waitstaff when to circulate hors d'oeuvres. She caught glimpses of Lucy, who'd come to support her sister, chatting excitedly with some of the new staff. Midway through the night, the reviews started trickling in on social media, glowing praise for the ambiance, the farm-to-table concept, the exquisite cocktails. Sarah's heart soared. This was a testament to all their hard work, and for the first time in her life she felt she was part of something meaningful, bigger than just survival. Yet amid the success, Sarah noticed Caldwell growing distant again, retreating into his reserved shell as the evening went on. She spotted him standing alone near the bar, swirling a glass of whiskey, his gaze distant. She approached suddenly concerned. "You okay?" she asked softly. He offered a small nod. "Just overshadowed by memories, I guess." She tilted her head questioningly. He took a slow sip. "Nights like these remind me of where I started. I used to be so hungry, so desperate. Every win felt like a triumph over my past. Now that I'm here, part of me wonders if it's all just vanity. Another restaurant, opening another brand expansion. Does it really matter?" Sarah's eyes softened. She recalled their conversation at the charity gala. This man, for all his wealth and power, was haunted by the question of purpose. "I think it matters," she said gently. "Not just for you, but for the people who work here, for the customers who'll have a new dining experience, for the suppliers who'll sell their organic produce. It's not just vanity, unless you let it be." He set the glass down, looking at her with unguarded gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. "It's good to have perspective." In that moment, the bustle of the restaurant blurred into the background. They stood side by side, two people from very different worlds who had somehow converged on this shared journey. A fleeting warmth passed between them, part mutual respect, part shared triumph. The grand opening was a resounding success. Culinary bloggers posted rave reviews, and local news outlets hailed Caldwell's new venture as a beacon of innovation. Investors congratulated him on yet another feather in his cap, and quietly, Sarah Donovan's name began circulating among industry professionals as the untrained waitress turned consultant who'd played a key role in making it all happen. In the weeks that followed, Sarah felt a sense of achievement like never before. She continued her classes, delving deeper into the art of restaurant management and design. Caldwell provided more opportunities, sending her to conferences, introducing her to renowned chefs. Their once tenuous relationship was now laced with mutual admiration, still professional, but undeniably friendlier. Lucy was thriving in college, forging new dreams of her own. For the first time in years, Sarah wasn't living day to day in survival mode. She was planning for the future, forging a career, exploring possibilities. But life has a way of throwing curveballs just when everything seems perfect. One chilly afternoon, about 6 months after her new journey began, she received a frantic call from Lucy. Sobbing, panicked words. "It's Dad's car. It was hidden. I can't do this. Help me." Sarah's world lurched. She rushed to Lucy's campus, where she found her sister in the parking lot, distraught, hugging her knees. After coaxing Lucy to talk, she learned that a distant family member had found the battered remains of their father's old car at a junkyard outside the city, the one he'd been driving the night of the fatal accident. Lucy, haunted by grief, had driven there and confronted the twisted metal relic. The memories, the guilt, the pain, everything had resurfaced. Sarah held her sister in a tight embrace. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Lucy shook her head, tears streaming. "I didn't want to burden you. You've been so busy, so happy for the first time in forever. I didn't want to ruin that." Sarah felt tears burn her own eyes. She realized how absorbed she'd become in her new role. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "You're never a burden. Let's face this together." "Okay." Lucy nodded, clinging to her sister. They spent the rest of the day talking about the accident, about the grief they'd tucked away in corners of their hearts. It was an emotional catharsis they'd avoided for years. Sometimes the busyness of survival distracts us from healing old wounds. That night, Sarah found herself thinking about how fleeting life can be, how quickly everything can change. She remembered the night she confronted James Caldwell at the diner. She remembered how a single moment of defiance had sparked a chain reaction that led her here to a brand new life. Standing by the bedroom window, she gazed out at the shimmering city lights, a quiet gratitude in her heart. No matter what tomorrow brought, she was grateful for this chance, grateful for the personal growth, the financial stability, and the sense of purpose she'd found. In the months that followed, Lucy began attending therapy to process her lingering trauma. Sarah made time to support her sister, taking weekends off whenever possible to spend with Lucy. Caldwell, noticing her need for balance, adjusted her schedule. Another gesture of compassion that reminded her that under his tough exterior there was a beating heart. By the 1-year mark of her new career, Sarah had blossomed into a confident consultant. She'd even begun conceptualizing her own potential restaurant, one that combined the diner's warmth with modern flair. Caldwell encouraged her, promising to back her vision if it ever came to fruition. And as for Caldwell himself, he'd found in Sarah a sort of grounding influence. Whenever his business empire threatened to consume him, her unfiltered honesty brought him back to earth. Their dynamic remained professional, though tinged with a camaraderie that made both question whether the lines might blur into something else one day. But that's another story, perhaps for another time. For now, suffice it to say that the day Sarah Donovan told off a millionaire in a humble diner was the day everything changed. From that explosive confrontation came an unlikely alliance, a shared path of learning and growth, and ultimately a testament to the power of standing up for oneself, even when the odds seem impossibly stacked against you. Thank you for joining Sarah's remarkable journey from an overworked waitress defending her dignity in a small diner to a rising star in Chicago's high-end restaurant scene. This story shows us that standing up for yourself, even when you're afraid, can open doors you never imagined. It reminds us that every person has value, every dream has a spark, and one bold moment can change your life forever. If Sarah's story moved or inspired you, please take a moment to like this video. Let's spread the word about courage and resilience. Share it with your friends who could use a reminder that a single act of defiance might lead to unimaginable opportunities. And finally, subscribe to our channel for more uplifting, dramatic tales that celebrate the extraordinary power of the human spirit. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Thank you for being part of this journey.